All right, now this is a fun one. I'm with Joel Seedman, and yesterday I had two women come on and talk about human trafficking, so that was super heavy,
Ooh,
super emotional. Today we get to have a fun conversation, talk about training, talk about the industry. So I'm looking forward to that. So how are you doing? How's everything going with you?
good, man. It's been kind of a crazy year, 2020. I guess you call it the year to forget, right? But no, it's been good, man. Now I'm just plugging away with my business. Doing things down here in the Atlanta area, doing my training and working with athletes, general populations, and kind of just doing what I do. But been a big fan of your work for I think actually about going on close to 2 decades. I remember
Wow.
when I was back in undergrad, when I was first starting to kind of look through all the going to bodybuilding.com, T Nation, just looking all the different content that I could see from all the different experts. And I remember reading all your stuff, man. So you're definitely a legend in this field. So happy to be on here.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's really nice to hear. I mean, I'm 46 now. I've been in this industry for 17 years, but I still feel like a kid in it. I still feel like there's so much to learn. I don't feel that I've accumulated this vast of information where there isn't anything to learn anymore. I mean, anyone who follows you on Instagram, you put up so many different interesting exercises. And what I like about you, Joel, is that you're not doing stuff for the sake of just being different. And I think that's a mistake I see a lot in our industry where people they have variety for the sake of variety, but it doesn't really make sense. They're just trying to do something different. While with your stuff, it's basic movements, but slight nuances or major variations with it for very specific purposes.
Right.
So I think you nail it on that. You embody the best of what we like to call functional training. We hear that word so much. Some people think it's standing on one leg on a Bosu ball, pressing a dumbbell, which hey, I do for fun, in my backyard. I don't know what athletic benefit there is, but your stuff is very specific, and I pick up a lot of really cool exercises looking at your page each day. So you put a lot of good value out there.
Appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think that's I think that like you said, I think it's the key. There's nothing wrong with variety, but there does need to be a reason. Generally speaking, man, it's fine to occasionally, screw around with some things and
Right.
do stuff for fun. But when it comes to actually programming something into your workout, like you said, I think the key is there's got to be a reason for it.
Yeah.
And for the most part, what I do, like you said, it's like, okay, you take the fundamental movement patterns and you add a slight twist to it to one, either expose maybe a deficiency or an imbalance or some type of asymmetry in the body, or something that may be so unstable that it basically forces the lifter to do it with the proper form. Otherwise, they won't be able to successfully complete the lift. So
Yeah.
just program it.
How much of this stuff is just you figuring out things on your own versus learning from someone else or someone mentoring you on these aspects of training?
Yeah, I would say actually it's been 95% just me kind of
Yeah.
going through. I mean, literally, I learned from you. I learned from Christian Thibaudeau. I learned from Charles Staley, Charles Poliquin. Rest his soul, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But I mean, early on, I mean, literally, it was just kind of looking to see, hey, what are all the different experts doing? I never really had a mentor or like, oh, this is the person that I'm gonna follow to the T. I tried to learn from the best, such as yourself, and kind of
Thank you.
combine different the elements and then I did my studies, my research, and my undergrad, master's, and PhD, and that kind of having that just the science knowledge, the practical knowledge, and then experimenting with different things. It just kind of helped me to essentially create my own method, so to speak. Not to say that it's like, oh, I don't use other people's methods, but it just kind of allowed me to pick and choose and hone in on what I felt was optimal.
And I think that's the healthiest approach for a new trainer to think about is you're not looking to reinvent the wheel. You're not looking to be different for the sake of being different. Learn all the basic compound movements and all the basic concepts, and then put your own touch on it, which is just going to come from experience. Each of us is just going to look at things a little bit differently. I mean, like with kettlebells, I started swinging them on the outside of my legs. I just played around with it one day and I found, okay, this works really well for my body type.
That's
And then
awesome.
other people played around with it and it worked well for theirs. And many people try it and it's not comfortable. So they stick to the traditional motion. But it's good to have those options. And
Okay.
I think sometimes trainers are looking for permission from someone else. In other words, someone else has to do it first. And then they go, okay, let me try that. But they don't want to be the first one to put it out there in case they get a lot of flack with it. So we see that quite a bit in the
Oh
industry.
yeah, no, I totally. I mean, I think that's the key too. I try and do with all my clients, with all my athletes. I try to get them to the point where it's not just about me telling them, "Hey, here's what you're going to do. Follow my words and my instructions to the T." It's kind of like, "Hey, let's get you efficient at the basic fundamental movement patterns, And then if you want to kind of play around within that and make subtle adjustments, and hey, if this feels better, if this stance feels better, if this grip width feels better, if this particular adjustment feels a lot better on your joints, and you just notice a significant difference, then hey, let's do that. It's more about them having that sense of feel, and that sense of feel in proprioception is what I really try to advocate with everyone, because at some point the client or athlete has to learn how to kind of become their own coach. And as you know, that's really how you master movement. Right. You can't just keep relying on that external feedback and auditory cues from some other voice. You got to be able to do it yourself.
Yeah, so true. Same thing with nutrition, right? You have to get to the point where you experiment with a variety of things. I always encourage experimentation. You want to try keto, go for it. You want to try a vegan diet, go for it. Just try whatever it is. But at some point, you're probably going to have to find a combination of different protocols that works best for you. So someone may say, hey, this is how I put macronutrients together. And then that doesn't work for you, but you modify a few things, maybe a little bit more fat in your diet, a little bit more protein, less carbs, or vice versa. And now you figure out what works for you. And I think that's where people get impatient, is that people want someone else to just tell them what to do and not think about it. But when it comes to nutrition, that's something that's so important that every adult should know how to put together a healthy meal. You know, you shouldn't be 45 and you still don't know how to cook a healthy meal. You still don't know what a healthy meal is. I mean, part of the reason why we got hit so hard by COVID is that we're such an unhealthy country. We have skyrocketed obesity levels. We have high levels of heart disease and diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So of course, when you get exposed to something like COVID, it can be life-threatening because you have so many underlying health issues already. This is just tipping you right over. So I mean, now I think the message people should get, and I don't know how many people are getting this message or even thinking about it, is that you have to make your health paramount. And part of that is really healthy nutrition, optimal sleep, training, all of that together to make yourself as resilient as possible against COVID or anything else that comes at your way.
Totally. No, I 100% agree. I mean, I think that longevity is also a big factor. I think, early on when I got into lifting, at first it was like, hey, lift heavy, get stronger, get bigger, like screw health. I don't need to worry about health. But you realize, well, the health is so important. But in all actuality, a healthy body ends up producing the most strength and the most muscle, particularly when you're doing things naturally. So you really can't neglect health, because at some point, it kind of comes full circle. You're going to have to address it at some point, and if you don't address it early enough and kind of be proactive about it, you're going to run into some issues. Then you're going to have to take multiple steps backwards. That's kind of what happened to me in my mid-20s. I just had this, my approach was a little bit more hardcore, lift heavy, and then I was like, man, my body is just kind of starting to fall apart. How do I correct this? And then the health part started to become so paramount, but I started to see, hey, wow, the health and the performance, you really can't separate them. They're all part of the same thing. So that's big.
Right. And the thing is, if you want to be strong, you have to last long enough to get strong. And if you're training at this ridiculously intense level, here's a mistake I see a lot in the gym, and I'm sure you see this, is there's a young guy, he's a really cool guy, he's very strong, he just got into powerlifting. Now, the problem is every time he works out, he demonstrates what he can do, meaning he's going to failure every single time. Every workout is a maximum effort. And I tell him, I go, just work on the skill set of getting really good at a deadlift, squat, or bench press. And you do that by high frequency, lower percentage of intensity so that you can do it in a high frequency way. Now, each workout is going to feel really easy. And for a regular person, that's a good thing. But for those of us who love to train, that's almost torture. It's torture to go lift weights and it feels so easy. And you could add 50, 60 pounds to the bar, but that's going to be demonstrating strength. It's not going to be building strength. So I always like to use the analogy of most of your workout should be deposits. You're making deposits in the bank. Boom, boom, boom. You're just adding money. And then every once in a while, you do a big withdrawal to see where you're at. Maybe once a year, maybe never. It just depends. And when you do that, not only will you get stronger faster and have more longevity, but the process is actually going to be more enjoyable because you're not going to be so beat up all the time. Well, I mean, this one message that won't die is no pain, no gain, right? We still hear that. People really still think that they have to be wiped out after a workout, that fatigue is the goal of the workout, and that if you're not super sore the next day, then it was a waste of time.
No, I'm 100% with you on that. I mean, it's kind of like you said, it's about building strength, building muscle, not just demonstrating your current abilities. And a lot of this comes down to, and you've talked about this too, but that neuromuscular component, that neuromuscular efficiency,
Right.
and that's such a huge part of it. And that higher frequency of training, that's what allows you to become neuromuscularly efficient, so that
Right.
when you need to, perform the movement, that you have the most skill at it. I mean, it's just like any other skill, practice. Okay, you got to practice it, and the more effective and the better your technique gets. Okay, well, guess what? You're going to be able to handle more weight. You're going to be able to handle it in a safer fashion. You're going to be able to repeat that more frequently, and the best way to do that is that higher frequency training. Which, to do that, you can't be crossing over into failure every single workout. You got to leave a little bit in the tank, to the point where it's like, man, I feel like I could do more, but that leaves you like itchy, wanting to come back to the gym the next day and then crush again,
Yeah.
rather than, oh my gosh, I'm shot, I need a few days off. That's, maybe for guys that are taking large amounts of steroids that may
Yeah.
work. I even think you're seeing bodybuilders being a little smarter about some of that
Right.
crazy high intensity. So,
Yeah. You're familiar with the small up squat program, right?
oh, brutal. Yeah.
Now, here's the problem: most guys. So I'm not including women in this because they're much better with not overestimating their strength. But the
Right.
mistake most guys make is they always put their projected estimated 1 rep max way higher than it actually is.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I think I can squat 500 pounds, and they've never done more than 425.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
You think you can do that? In actuality, when I did the small up program, I took a page from Jim Wendler. I took maybe 85, 90% of what I thought what I was sure my 1 rep max was. And I used that to calculate all the weights for the program. Now, it was still a brutally hard program, but I got really good results with it, especially in the first 4 weeks, without wiping myself out as much as I hear from other people doing. I even applied it to deadlifts back in 2018. I did trap bar for the high volume days or the high repetition days. And then I did just standard barbell deadlift for the lower rep days, higher weight. And that actually worked really well too. But again, I used a conservative max. So let's say my deadlift at that time was maybe 565. I used 545 to calculate the weights, just a little bit less. And as a result, each of those workouts was hard, no doubt, but it didn't wipe me out. My back wasn't all sore afterwards. I wasn't stiff. I didn't have knee issues or anything like that. So I think it's less is more is what I try to tell people, but it's extremely difficult, especially a young man, to get that point across because they just feel unstoppable.
No, I'm 100%. And I think, that's what allows you to focus on the quality too.
Right.
The quantity and the numbers game, it just gets in people's heads, especially early on, when you're young. It's all about the numbers. It's all about kind of having this compulsion to reach these certain goals that you set for yourself. And if you don't hit these numbers, then, I'm getting weaker. I'm not getting, I'm not doing what I need to be. Everybody's getting ahead of me.
Yeah.
Your muscles are kind of stupid. They don't know what weights on the bar. I always say, like, they have no clue whether it's 400 or
Right.
500. They know tension. They know load.
Yeah.
They know intensity. So if you can create that, perfect form with good weight, doesn't have to be maximum weight, but good weight, and really create that good intramuscular tension, really solid technique, that's probably going to build a lot more strength and hypertrophy than trying to go an extra little bit of weight where your form's breaking down and you're losing tension because you're having to, shift and wiggle and kind of compensate to get the weight up. So yeah, I like those more conservative numbers, like you said, just dialing it back just that little bit really makes a difference.
I mean, Charles Poliquin told me once that he never counted low quality reps, meaning if he had a client that was doing overhead military press and reps 1 through 5 looked really good, but reps 6 and 7, the technique was really compromised, just big sitting back and the bar wasn't going up evenly. Those 2 reps weren't counted. So now his clients are incentivized not to go to that place because they're not going to be counted. And I think that, I think CrossFit's done a lot of good in terms of getting, especially for women, getting women excited about weight training. But I think some of the negatives of CrossFit is that making weight training a competition.
Yeah.
So now you're competing with someone else. Now, when you compete with someone else, you're going to get sloppy. So you're doing 50 push-ups, and let's say the first 25 look great, but you want to keep going. Now the next 25 don't look like the first 25. And Valery Fedorenko, one of the best kettlebell lifters out there, this guy has a clip of him military pressing 105-pound kettlebell 30 times with each arm. Now, what's really impressive is that rep 30 does not look any different than rep 1. There's no tension in his face. He's not struggling. He's not breathing hard. It's just like a locomotive. It's just smooth from start to finish. So that's what I always try to emphasize to people too is when you lift something heavy, you don't want to just be able to lift something heavy. You want it to look really good when you do it. Like someone sees it and goes, wow, he made that look easy. He didn't show pain in his face. His back didn't look like it was about to break in half. I mean, sometimes I see people deadlifting and it looks like an alien's about to go out of their shoulder blades. You know?
Oh no, it's too man.
They feel good. That's not a repetition though, no matter what happens. You know?
No, it's true. Some of the form is pretty cringe-worthy these days. But no, I mean, I think, like you said, I think there's that balance of finding that ability to overload, because obviously progressive overload is still the name of the game when it comes to strength training. Okay. But how do we do that in the most efficient manner, in the safest manner? And even a lot of powerlifters, a lot of these guys who are squatting, 1,000 pounds in competition, you look at their numbers actually in their, kind of in-season training, or when they're not going crazy with their numbers. A lot of the times they're using 50, 60, 70%, or on their speed days, obviously, power days, a lot less than that. But they're usually dialing it way back. Same thing on their bench press, their deadlift. It's like, man, they got to save those crazy high numbers for when they need it, because you do those too many times, it's just going to break you down.
Yeah, right. You have to save it for the competition or whenever you're going to express that strength. If you're expressing it in the gym all the time, now you're burned out by the time you get to a competition. Similar to an MMA fighter in training camp, I mean, you have to develop that camp so that you peak at just the right time, which is when the fighter's in the cage. I mean, if you peak a week before and now the fighter's going in the cage in a depleted level, because when you train as hard as they do, you can't maintain that level of training intensity for a long period of time. It's like a train going as fast as possible. It can't maintain that speed forever, only for a short period of time, and then it's just going to implode. And the same thing happens with an athlete. So I know you work with a lot of professional athletes. You work with football players. What are some of the other ones? Do you work with MMA fighters too?
I haven't done too much with MMA. I'd love to. I think some of the stuff I do with stability work and whatnot would transfer really well. But mainly football, baseball, track, tennis, a little bit of basketball as well. Football probably makes up at least 50% of what I shoot, man. The football players, speaking of, that having that compulsion to try and always lift heavy and beat their numbers and beat their teammates' numbers. Oh man. So these are the guys that you really have to actually educate them on it. You can't just tell them, no, you're using this number and you're going down. It's like they want to know why. You give them a reason why. You educate them just a little bit, just give them a basic understanding of some of the simple sciences of it, and explain it to them. And then they go through a few workouts and feel the difference. They actually feel like, hey, this is more productive. I'm muscle feeling this more. And instead of feeling like every time I squat, my joints are killing me, they're able to do a workout and like, wow, my joints didn't hurt, my knees didn't hurt, my back felt fine, my muscles got a little bit sore, but I'm feeling good, I'm feeling fresh, feeling recovered. And then after a few times then they buy in, and then you have them for their careers, to be honest. They're kind of sold. So that kind of that old school mentality, unfortunately, you're still seeing it a lot, surprisingly, in the NFL, even more than collegiate. I have a decent amount of college and NFL guys, but for whatever reason, I think it's because these strength coaches kind of get grandfathered into the NFL, so to speak, and just being in the system. They're some of the worst offenders with, kind of pushing these guys with, hey, you got to use this heavy weight. They don't really focus on form and technique. It's very old school. It's very kind of just more is better, lift heavier, and then don't worry about stability, don't worry about mobility, don't worry about alignment. Just do your squats, go do your bench press, and the college is where we're starting to see a little bit better kind of adaptation and evolution of the strength and conditioning industry. I think you're starting to see some of the younger strength coaches maybe go in there who have been educated. And they understand, hey, this is not a numbers game. This is the longevity game. It's more about performance than just putting up big numbers. So it's pretty crazy, though, to see.
Yeah, and as a strength coach for a professional athlete, the last thing you want to do is have this athlete get injured at one of your workouts, and now they can't play. Now they can't make money. So you have to be really careful with professional athletes. I mean, they may be making millions of dollars, and then they do an exercise they didn't need to do. They did a sledgehammer strike with poor technique and they hit themselves in the foot. Now they're out for the season and it's your fault, and they're pissed at you and they're going to tell everyone, don't go to that guy. He totally screwed up my career. So you have to be real careful. A lot of trainers, I mean, they get into it, and the allure of working with celebrities and professional athletes is foremost on their mind. They think that's what I want. What I always tell trainers, I go, the money's in the masses. The professional athletes, that's all great. It's fun to work with those kind of people. But in your training facility, it's highly unlikely that it's going to be 90% professional athletes at any time, right? maybe 10%. Is that your experience?
Oh yeah, it's very cyclical. It's very seasonal. I mean, football, you may only have these guys for maybe at most 12 weeks out of the year where you really get to work with them, because even in the off season, they're required to go back for these kind of mini checkups and mini camps. And so, I mean, you can't just make all of your livelihood on pro athletes. There has to be some general population there if training is going to be what you do. So probably only about, I would say, half of what I do is with pro athletes and collegiate athletes, and then everything else is high school, general populations, even a few geriatric folks, a few bodybuilders and things. So it's nice. It's also good, I think, to kind of continuing to work with diverse clients, because it's really easy to just get into a one mold and kind of forget about, hey, what about this type of person as well? And when you work with those larger range of clients, I think it's more educational. It's a little bit more eye-opening, and it's a richer experience, because you can see actually how there are a lot of similarities when it comes to human movement. It's like, hey, everyone needs to squat, everyone needs to press, everyone needs to hinge. We do need to make some subtle adjustments, but the technique, the programming, it's almost even more important for the older folks, for example. Their form needs to be perfect, and if you can't be loading up a 70-year-old who's got even mediocre form on a barbell squat. If they're going to do a barbell squat, their form has to be perfect. If not, you're going to have to give them a different type of squat. So it's pretty wild. But and the other thing is too, I think with the NFL, I mean, you probably keep up with it, but you've seen all the injuries. Happening. It's insane, and everyone's trying to figure out, like, why is this happening? There's even reports about, like, oh, it's the grass, there's the turf. It's nothing to do with that. It's the technique. A lot of this is the programming on the strength coaches, or the athletes themselves, taking that time off during COVID, not being proactive with their bodies, just kind of being a little bit passive about it, and just thinking, I'll be fine. And we're seeing the result of that, and it's pretty devastating. I mean, you're seeing an insane number of ACL injuries, insane number of non-contact injuries or contact injuries that should have not been serious, and that are basically season-ending. So it's pretty nuts.
What do you think are some of the flaws with how NFL players are trained traditionally, like at a performance center? Do you think that it's not addressing imbalances, it's too much of motions that cause some kind of overcompensation and then an injury on the field? What do you think are some of the common mistakes with the way most football players are being trained?
Yeah, that's a great question. Shoot, man, where to begin with that one? I may make some enemies on that. No, I have just as a warning for people who are listening. I have pretty specific ways that I like to train, and I don't like to go after people and say, oh, this person's training is wrong. I never like to mention names, so just I have a very specific way I like to do things. Okay, and everyone does, for that matter. Otherwise, everyone would be copying someone else. But even the most fundamental trainer who's been in the industry for 6 months, they, in their minds, say, hey, here's how I'm going to do it. So everybody has their own methods. But I think, in answering your question, I think excessive mobility and excessive range of motion for some of these athletes, as odd as that may sound to some, because you always think of, oh, these athletes, they need more mobility, they need more flexibility. I think one of the biggest issues is that they don't have enough motor control, they don't have enough stability, and their alignment is funky, and that's what leads to issues. And it's not so much that it leads to issues in the weight room. Like you said, you can have scenarios where you load an athlete up and then they get injured in the weight room, and that is the worst possible thing that you can do, because as a strength coach, the health of the athlete in the weight room is of the utmost importance. But it's kind of like, hey, they're fine in the weight room, there's no injuries, but because they've ingrained faulty motor programs, faulty movement patterns into their central nervous system, those things trickle into how they move on the field. If they're squatting with an imbalance in their hips, if one hip or foot is externally rotating or they're shifting their weight to one side, guess what? That is happening when they're running, when they're jumping, when they're cutting, when they're sprinting. So you may not see it because it's a little bit more obscured and hidden, but those same compensation patterns and imbalances are showing up. And it's just a matter of time before it does lead to kind of a catastrophic injury. If somebody's got valgus collapse when they squat, even if it's mild, okay, it doesn't take a large or strong incoming valgus force on their knee to tear their ACL and be done for the year. So if they don't have crazy locked in hips, feet, ankles, all the muscles surrounding the various joints and their core stabilization, their alignment, it's not going to take much, and they're done for the season. So so for me, that's why it's so important to look at some of the most subtle details. A lot of barefoot as well. So that's big. Training everything from the feet up and making sure those neural signalings are getting through.
Yeah, I see you using that sand dune device, and I actually bought one of those recently. I haven't gotten it, but that looks really cool. What do you think are the benefits of using that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great tool. I think it's a great combination of like, hey, this is stability training on an unstable surface. You can make an argument kind of in the same realm as Bosu balls, but it's not as extreme. So what I found with it is that you can still overload the athlete with decent weight. They don't have to actually drop the weight too much. So if they're using maybe 365 on squats, I actually have had quite a few athletes go 315 on the sand dune, and they're fine. It's just it forces them to be a lot slower, a lot more locked in, and any little compensation they do have, it kind of addresses that immediately. Their feet are forced to activate just enough oscillations and instability to force them to clean up their technique. Not so much, at the Bosu balls. Like, okay, a lot of these guys, you give them an empty bar, they wouldn't be able to do 5 clean reps. So what's the point? So sand dune is a nice balance of kind of promoting a little bit of instability training without going so extreme. So, dude, I think you're gonna love it. I'm a big fan of it.
How long did it take for it to get delivered when you ordered?
I think like maybe a week. Well, mine was way before COVID, so I
Oh,
don't know.
okay.
Yeah, you've been
So
waiting.
I ordered mine a couple of weeks ago, and I'm gonna have to look it up and
Yeah,
make sure that I put the right address down.
yeah. I guess you can just hop in your bed, put a barbell on your bed, and start doing squats on your mat.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do that to get going. I'll do it on the Indo board outside. I'm sure that'll go.
Man, I see you do some crazy stuff on that. That is impressive. That's amazing balance and control. I mean, I think people look at that, they don't understand how incredibly tough that is. I was watching some of your videos recently with that. I'm like, man, that's. I mean, I consider myself to have decent balance and stability and motor control, but I don't think I could do some of those things, man. It's crazy.
I've got interesting skills on random things. So
Oh
the
yeah.
Indo board that came fairly quickly to me. I mean, I've been using an Indo board since 2003 on and off, and I do it for fun. I'm not doing presses on an Indo board because I think it's going to improve my bench press or it's going to improve my incline press. I'm just having fun with it, and also you learn how to manage fear, which is what I really like about it. Because when you're holding 2 kettlebells and you get on this board and it's unstable, you start worrying. You go, okay, I'm about to flip off this thing. When you're pressing the bells overhead, you have to stabilize so that you don't go flying off with weights overhead. And so you learn how to manage that and then stay really calm. The biggest benefit I find with the Indo board is it teaches you how to relax and stay calm. Because the average person, the average gym goer who gets on the board, the first thing they do when they get on it is tighten up. They think that's what's going to prevent the board from flipping them off. And that actually makes the board flip you off. You have to just get on it, and it's like a wave of water. You just go with it wherever it goes. That's all you do. If it's going to the left, you go with it. It goes to the right, you go with it. And then eventually you learn how to slow it down where it's not moving at all, and now you're in control. Wow. But when you try to get it on stabilized, you're using all those tension muscles you use when you're deadlifting or squatting. That's not going to work. It's a totally different skill set.
Wow, that's wild. Yeah, that's crazy. No, I like what you said though about kind of the little bit of that fear factor, and that is one of the reasons why I will periodically use some pretty crazy variations. And again, 80% of what I do is fundamentals. I only go kind of nuts with about 20% of it, but sometimes athletes need to learn how to focus their minds because their minds are in all kinds of different directions. They don't have crazy music blasting in the background and 20 guys around them patting them on the back. They're useless, and they have to know how to hone in and get zone because that's a struggle for them. So sometimes putting them on the unstable exercises, that's one of the best things for their mental focus and cognitive, abilities, just to learn how to hone in and not just be so like, always amped up and just kind of so exuberant that they can't lock things in. So I think there's that balance too between the kind of sympathetic and parasympathetic system. It's like, yeah, you need to be able to activate everything without getting so sympathetic that you're in that fight or flight mode, and then everything kind of goes to pieces, especially from a performance standpoint.
I find that a lot of people are also very adrenaline based, and what I mean by that is on their way to, let's say, a heavy workout, they're listening to really intense music, they're psyching themselves up, they're pumping adrenaline like crazy, and by the time they actually get to the actual motion, they're going to have an adrenaline dump.
Yeah.
So you basically want to do the opposite. I actually listen to relaxing music on the way to the gym, and I'm pretty relaxed doing my warm-up sets. And then once we get to the heavier sets, now I start ramping it up a little bit, get that adrenaline going, because I don't want to waste any energy on the non-essential. I want to save it for exactly when I need it. You have to time that perfectly, as opposed to just boom, boom, get psyched up. That's why everybody wants these pre-workout drinks that have 500 milligrams of caffeine and 5 other amphetamine type stimulants. So they're all amped up and you feel like you're going to have a great workout. You're like, man, I'm ready to punch a hole in the wall. But then you actually start your workout and you're actually weaker because your blood pressure's through the roof. You're not going to perform at a high level with your blood pressure through the roof. Your adrenaline is pumping like crazy, and there's going to be a subsequent adrenaline dump. That's just inevitable. And the problem with those stimulant-based pre-workout drinks is it gives you the illusion of energy you don't have. So now you're working out harder than you should, and now your recovery time is going to be much longer than it should be as well. You've depleted your reserves so much more.
No, I think people mistake, kind of adrenaline with energy and adrenaline. They confuse it. It's very different. Yeah, no. So, I mean, and sometimes too, even if the pre-workout does work, if it's too strong, it's like, man, your heart rate gets so elevated, it actually fatigues you for the workout. You may be good for 1 set or 2 sets, but then you can't get your heart rate back down, so your recovery sucks. You only get half the work in. So no, and I see you with your supplements, you saw a lot of good stuff, and you really work on finding the balance of, not putting in the wrong ingredients first off, and not putting in exorbitant amounts of stimulants and caffeine that just gets people so amped up. And then they get adrenal fatigue, which can lead to overtraining, and their hormones get jacked up. It can be a mess. So it's I know that's kind of your expertise, which is very cool. But yeah, people, man, people drinking 3-4 cups of coffee and then they take 2 servings of pre-workout. It's like, man, it's destroying their bodies. It's crazy.
Yeah, they don't realize what the long-term cost of that, especially a young person. They're thinking that they're just going to feel this way forever, and you don't realize that. There's one guy had a really good saying. What did he say? He goes, usually they say pain is temporary, glory is forever. And he reversed that and said, glory is temporary, pain is forever. So it's like you put your body through the cheese grinder or cheese grater to deadlift 800 pounds, and you were able to do it in one day for one moment. But now you can't ever do it again because you blew out your back, or your body's shot now. So now you're never going to be able to deadlift again. Now, I'd rather be able to deadlift 500 pounds for the next 20 years than work up to 700 pounds one time, one day, and then never be able to work out again because my body's shot now.
Oh, yeah. I've had a few of those moments, not really in the last 8-9 years because I learned the hard way, but there were a few things. It's like, man, it's like you got one attempt to do that, and then it's like that's it, because it just takes such a toll on your body, especially the low back. I mean, for example, it's so sensitive. Once you set that off, and it's kind of like the rest of your life. You got to be careful with it. I know I was doing stupid stuff in my early years of training. My low back is incredibly sensitive. My form is not perfect, and I still go heavy, but it's to the point where it has to be as heavy as I can go while still being therapeutic and still being perfect form. Like if I start delving into that, kind of a grinding rep, like on a squat or a deadlift, or if it doesn't feel perfectly locked in, it could even look good externally. People would look and be like, oh, it looks fine. No, it's got to feel good too, because I know I'll pay the consequences for that. I think a lot of people who have been training for, a few decades now, I think we all have underlying hidden things that if we got, MRIs, we probably see a ton of stuff. And I don't even want to know what's wrong with, what's wrong with my body, all the disc things and cartilage stuff. I'm sure there's plenty, but as long as the training is right, it's like you can keep training hard and keep training relatively heavy for hopefully for for decades and decades. Yeah. But you just go past that line, it's like, man, it'll take a toll.
It really does. And as you get older, you have to prioritize restoration a lot more. That's what I find. I can still train as hard as I used to 20 years ago, but back then, you're in college, you can go out drinking all night on a Friday night, you wake up hungover, go have a great workout. I mean, if I have 2 drinks now, I'm going to be hungover, and the last thing on my mind is going to be working out. So I have no tolerance. I don't drink much. So the restoration though, back in 2014, I decided to do an experiment where I get a massage once a week. I found a really good therapist, and I've always wanted to do an experiment of frequent massages and see what impact it has on my training. So I'm going to commit to once a week for the next 90 days. And guess what? It's been once a week for about 5 years now because the benefits were so profound. Because at the end of a training week, she would go in there and just break up all that inflammation that I built up over the week. So that when I go into the next week training, I have a new set point. My body's fresh. It's ready to go. I'm not accumulating all that inflammation. So if you don't get a massage or you don't do anything to restore, over time, you're just accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and then you get injured or you have a serious injury. So here you're staying one step ahead of it. It's like car maintenance. Instead of waiting for your car to break down, then you go to the shop, you just go get it checked out every once in a while. Make sure things are good. Make sure the tires have air in it. Make sure the battery is not going to die anytime soon. Make sure the engine is good. Just a couple preventive things. And the massage is a big one, though. You have to find a good therapist, though. You can't just go get a generic massage once a week. That's not worthless, but that's not what I'm talking about either. I mean, the lady I go to, it's painful. It's not. I don't go there going, oh wow, I've got a night. I'm going today at 6. I'm not sitting around going, oh yeah, I got a relaxing massage coming up later today. It's more like, oh boy, I got to brace myself mentally for that. Because she's putting your elbow in there, she's walking on your hamstrings. It's painful, but afterwards you feel way better. The next day you start feeling really good. So that one is huge. And I think people really, really undervalue the importance of sports massage. And then things like active release technique, which I do often too. Whenever I have an injury, I don't just sit around with pain. I go to an active release technique guy, this guy, Dr. Booth, who's an awesome chiropractor, and you get that stuff addressed. You could have an injury in your elbow that's going to last 2 weeks, but you can kick it out with 2 or 3 active release technique sessions and then be back in the game.
No, I think the being proactive about, musculoskeletal health is critical. Now, if I tell you this, this is good because we, obviously we have a lot of similar things and that we believe in and just different approaches. If I tell you this, you'll go nuts on here. But I've never had a massage once.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, now, there's a reason for that. Okay, I like to use myself as a bit of a human guinea pig. Okay. Right. So when I am huge into being proactive and, kind of like you said, with like the active release things, the way I address it a little bit different. But when I get stiff and when things get a little bit funky or things get off, or I feel like I got some inflammation in some areas, I will actually address that with just some very light, what I call eccentric isometrics. You may be familiar with some of the stuff I do with that. It could even be like a body weight squat and just holding that and feeling the muscles kind of elongate back to their original length or get the length tension relationship back to neutral or feeling like some of the muscles that are tight release, or if the hamstrings are tight, doing like a really intense but light or even body weight RDL or body weight lunge or a body weight Bulgarian just to kind of loosen up the hips. So I do a lot of that. And it's been just kind of eye-opening for me to see over the years because I like to see, hey, if something's off, like if I can fix it with those, that means when people come to me and they have musculoskeletal things, it'll be a lot easier for me to help them because I kind of like I said, I use my body as a guinea pig. But I'm huge on the being proactive. I think that's big. When you, like you said, it's like you feel something, and I tell this to clients all the time. You feel a tightness in your hamstring, like a tweak, or you kind of pulled something. You don't just rest and sit around doing nothing. That'll take weeks to go away, and even after weeks, you're still going to feel it. You do a few active recovery things. Literally, after a few days, it's gone.
Yeah.
And so I think that's huge. Like you said, you can't just sit around thinking that the rest is going to do it. Rest, in my opinion, I think it's huge, but it can't be the only thing that you do when you have a nagging thing. You have to do the active recovery.
Yeah, if you have a nasty injury, you have to get in there with really specific restoration practices. Just sitting around waiting for it to recover on its own. I mean, eventually the pain will go away, but that doesn't mean the injury's been addressed. It could be there ready to be injured right again. I had a really nasty groin tear last year. I don't think it was a full tear, but it felt like a stretch. Right from the pubic bone all the way down my right leg, and then the pain shot up to the lower midsection too. I mean, it was really nasty. It wasn't something where I go, okay, let me take the weekend off. I'll be ready to go on Monday. I mean, when I was driving home, I thought about driving to the emergency room. It was that bad. Then I went home and I was lying on the couch, and my right leg fell off the couch, and then I just tried to raise it back up, and the pain was so severe I couldn't do that. So I had to just tilt my body to get into an upright position. But I went to the active release technique guy I work with maybe 2 days later. I would have gone to him sooner if it were open. I think this happened on a weekend. But I got to him fairly soon. And it was super painful when we got in there. So he couldn't work too much the first session because it was so sensitive. But he did a little bit of work. But long story short, over the course of, I think, only about 2 weeks, it was 50, 60% better, to the point where I could get back into training and just modify a few things. And then there was residual pain for maybe months after that, but 90% of it was addressed just from the active release technique, from being proactive. Now, if I just sat around waiting for that injury to heal, it would have been months.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think it would have healed properly. You have to get the physical therapy for proper healing.
I agree. I think you see this a lot, even just general populations. It's, people say, "Oh, you got a shoulder issue," but it's from 4 years ago. It's like 4 years ago. I mean, that should have, like you said. I mean, honestly, a few weeks, unless it's severe, it's like, yeah. I mean, but even still, even if it's severe, you should see some pretty huge improvements after like a few sessions if you're doing it. It shouldn't be like, "Oh man, this is taking forever." It's like, no, you should see some pretty immediate improvements each session. So that's big. I think, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've had some pretty rough things over the years too. Fortunately, I mean, for me, I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable when you're training heavy, but the technique, I think that's been a huge thing for me. I've blown out my back so many times I can't even. And those are the worst. Those are the ones that literally took me. I remember the last time it happened was when I was doing my PhD. It was like my first or second year in. And it took me literally 10 minutes to walk from my bed to the bathroom, which was probably only maybe 10 or 12 feet away. I mean, like I thought, I was like, man, I'm going to have to like go to the emergency room. I mean, it was literally that day. I probably did 3 or 4 hours of activation. It's really simple. Okay. Basically, like I said, eccentric, isometric, body weight squats, body weight hinges, body weight lunges. In the first few reps, I mean, I could only move 2 inches because it felt so painful. It was almost bringing tears to my eyes. It was so rough. But it's like you go a little farther, you start firing the muscles, start getting some blood flow in there, and things just start to loosen up a little bit. But man, I'm telling you, some of those things, it's like if you don't address them and you just sat there, it would be months. It would be months.
Yeah, it's just never going to get better on its own. Yeah. I wanted to go back to an earlier point. You talked about some of the older athlete or older trainees that you work with, and I think the mistake. I think it's great that you work with such people for the reasons you already said. That you learn how to work with a variety of people in the population. So you learn things there that I'm sure you can carry over to athletes as well that you may not have picked up if you didn't work with them otherwise. And I think the mistake that I think a lot of trainers who used to be really good athletes are often not great trainers because they're used to things coming pretty easily to them. They pick up new skills quickly. So when they're working with that sedentary person or someone who's maybe been detrained or maybe they've never done any serious training and they get frustrated. They go, man, this person can't even do a body weight squat and this person can't do this. And they don't really have any perspective on how to work with that person because they're thinking about themselves. They're thinking it from their point of view. I learned this so easily, so why can't everyone else learn it as easily as I can?
Yeah, no, totally. In fact, when some of these athletes tell me that their strength coach was a prior NFL athlete, immediately that's a red flag in my head. Immediately. Yeah. For 2 reasons. Because like you said, okay, generally speaking, they may have the genetic makeup that allows them to catch on faster, just, having more of that athletic background, maybe a little bit more coordination. And then the other things too is that they kind of were indoctrinated into a certain type of training methodology that they haven't been able to break out of because that's all they know. It's like, hey, their coaches did this before them. That's how they were taught. And they've just kind of grown up through the trenches in that type of training system. So for me, and that's not saying that every, previous or former athlete is a lousy strength coach. By no means. There's lots of great ones out there. But I think generally speaking, unless they try to break out of that mold and think for themselves and kind of force them to go to that higher level of science and not just assume that just because they could do it easily, that
Right.
the client can do it easily. It's like, no, they need to assess and evaluate and really examine the literature as closely as someone like you or me who kind of, you start from the most basic things and look at what the research is saying.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a really good example. Mark Phillippe, he's a guy I've learned a lot from. He has a former strongman competitor, and he has a facility out here in Vegas. And I think he embodies both sides really well because he has a very high level educational background in physical training. He's competed at a high level in strength training competition. And he's also not an egotistical guy where he likes to talk about what he used to be able to do all the time and how strong he is or any of that stuff. You have to really get it out of him for him to start talking about his accomplishments. So he doesn't look at a client from his point of view in terms of how he would feel in that situation. He's able to be a professional coach and give that person what they need. And he's always learning new things like you are to develop his skill base. And I think that's crucial. Now here's a really random question. Now when I go to the gym, I still see young guys making the same mistakes that I made back in the early 1990s when I first started working out in my parents' garage, which is bench pressing and curls. That's the workout, right? That's all we did back then. We just bench pressed and curls. We didn't do any leg work. Maybe we did some abs, some sit-ups or something. And somehow this same bad advice keeps getting passed down because here we are in 2020, and what are the kids doing at the gym? Curls and chest work. That's it. They don't do any legs. They don't do any back work. It's all what they can see in the mirror.
It's
Why do
true.
you think this bad advice keeps getting passed down? Why doesn't the average person know more? With all of the information out there on fitness now, I mean, the internet, there's so much information on how to do things properly, yet it just misses the mark with the average person.
Yeah, I think it's just everyone is so focused on what they see externally and the first glance in the mirror, the first glance they see someone. It's like, oh, their arms, oh, their chest. It's like, oh, what about their back? What about their traps? What about their shoulders? It's like, honestly, an impressive back and shoulders and traps will almost provide the illusion of a larger and more impressive physique than just
Right.
having arms and chest. So, and I think some of these young guns who get in there, they can't look past it, and they don't understand the importance of having a complete physique, not just from an aesthetic standpoint, but also from a functional standpoint. If
Right.
you have developed chest and developed biceps, but you haven't developed your back or your shoulders or your legs for that matter, or your core, you're going to have a lot of issues and you're going to have a lot of imbalances. And actually, your ability to build your arms, your ability to or to build your chest is going to be compromised because you need to have
Right.
that balance between the different muscle groups. So, and I think it's a matter of, these guys, they eventually hit plateaus, they get some injuries, and then they're either one of two things. They either drop out because it's like, oh, this sucks, it's not for me, I keep getting injured, I'm not getting the results I want, or they have to take it a step further. And I think we kind of hinted at this earlier. Everyone in the fitness industry, not even industry, I'm going to say just even your general, fitness enthusiast who likes to go work out, it's a journey for everyone. It has to be a journey. It's not, you can't let someone else guide you through it. You can't let them, hold their hand, let them lead you through it, or try and find your, number one coach that you like to follow and just, have them tell you to do it. It's a journey that you have to kind of lead yourself and find your own way, your own path. And I think you've totally done that. I've had to do that. I think the most successful strength coaches, they've had to do that. And that journey that's part of the beauty of it, is that process of kind
Yeah,
of
it is.
those different, even if you go on a little detour here and there and it was the wrong direction, you learn so much from that. And even if you got injured, you learn so much from your injuries.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. No, I learned a lot from that. I mean, every injury I've ever had actually it just
sorry,
adds to my knowledge base. Yes, no problem.
hold on. Sorry, shoot. All right, my bad. How the heck do you turn this off?
And sometimes my cell phone is connected to my
Yeah,
computer, so
I've got it off of my cell phone, and for whatever reason, okay, it's gonna go off in a second.
yeah, that's cool. It's all good. That happened to me last week, actually. My cell phone is tied in with my computer. I don't know how. It must be the cloud because I didn't put it together that way. So when my phone rings, it comes through my computer. And I put it on airplane mode. That didn't stop it, though. The call still kept coming through. So now I put it on do not disturb, and looks like that's working so far.
I think it's when these spam callers call, like they got some system that it's tough to shut it off. It's like they don't give you the decline option or something.
I had a spam caller the other day. He called and his number looked really similar to mine, right? The first three digits, 465, that's mine. And then the last four digits were different. And he called me and I was getting so many of these calls that I finally answered one. And then the guy was like, yeah, you just called me from this number. I was like, no, I didn't call you, man. And also, why would you call someone back who called you and didn't even leave a message? You
Yeah.
know, I don't just call back random numbers of people. Obviously, it wasn't that important. Otherwise, you would have left a message. I don't need to just call back everyone who calls me and wonder what it was about. If I won the lottery, they're going to tell me, okay? I don't have to
Exactly.
call them back to find out.
That's
So I don't know
great.
what the scam was, but I'm sure if I stayed on the phone, it would have led to that. I could look, stop calling, block, and then hopefully that's the end of it. But there's a lot of that going on right now. Final couple questions. One, what I'm really curious about is when did you get into the fitness industry and why?
Yeah. I started lifting weights kind of in, the garage when I was, 14, 15, but I realized when I was the field that I wanted to get into, and that this was kind of the area that I wanted to, kind of go into in school. And I originally wanted to do my business degree and then go to business school. And then at 18, I realized after doing a lot of just reading of materials, including some of yours, just all the different things I could get my hands on. And this was my passion. I had to fix my own body a little bit because I had scoliosis when I was
Hmm.
14. I realized the
Wow.
strength training was with that a lot. I didn't ever wear like a brace or do any of the traditional treatments for that. But I
Right.
realized that it was crucial for me. It helped a few of my friends and a few family people, and I was just so intrigued and fascinated by the whole exercise science thing that pretty much from 18 on to now, it's been part of my journey. And it's been just my passion and just kind of seeing what's been done in the industry, looking at the current research, and then just trying to improve upon it and improve upon different methods, and use myself as kind of a human guinea pig that I've done for years now. So it's been I would say kind of 18 was when I really got serious about true exercise science and practical kinesiology.
Yeah. And how long ago was this when you first started?
I'm 30. I'm 35 right now, so it's been about 17 years. And I literally started personal training. I started personal training at 18. I mean, I went to Indiana University, and I don't know how they let me, but they let me become a personal trainer before I even, took my first, right as I started taking my first kinesiology class. I don't know. I'm thrilled they did that, but man, that was such an eye-opening and educational experience for me to be able to start my education and to be training and starting
Yeah.
training at the exact same time. It was so helpful for me, and this isn't to brag, but just to kind of show the perspective that I have is that from the time I was 18, I probably haven't had more than a handful of weeks where I have not trained at least 20 hours um, per week. I mean, so the number of hours that I've had personal training has been quite a few. And I say that just because it's given me a chance to kind of look at so many different clients, so many different athletes, and just compare and contrast and apply the science and see what's worked. So a lot of the methods that I use, it's not just mindlessly, oh yeah, I'm coming up with something like you say because it looks cool or it's
Right.
different. It's like, no, this is a result of hours and thousands of hours of training and research and comparing the two and seeing what lines up and what's congruent with each other. So, but like I said,
Right.
it's all been part of the journey.
And I mean, the fact that you actually train people is an asset too, and that's a bit of a low bar to put there. But there's so many people that claim to be fitness experts that don't train anyone. They just happen to have a good physique, maybe genetically, or maybe they know how to train themselves. And all of a sudden, people go, "Hey, how did you get that way?" And then they get into this career, which is all fine and good, but you still have to educate yourself on how to be a trainer. Just because you know how to train yourself doesn't mean you know how to train other people.
Oh
And we
yeah,
see a
yeah.
lot of that happening now too. So I think someone like you who actually works with people, that actually is almost unique when in the context of social media, that is, because we see so many quote unquote fitness experts that look great and people come to them for advice and they have clients in terms of online clients, but they've never actually trained anyone in person.
Yeah, that's to me that's a must. If someone's going to market themselves as a fitness expert or performance guru, I need to be able to see that they've worked with a large variety of clients, and that they still are, because and you just learn so much from that. I don't care what type of science background you have, how much you've read, how much you've even experimented on yourself. There's so much you learn when you work with people, and when you work with, different types of bodies, different ages, different issues, different athletic backgrounds. That was more educational for me than my education, my college education, including my undergrad, master's, PhD. I learned infinitely more from training people hands-on than I ever did from any class or any research study that I ever took.
Yeah. My friend Scott Shetler, he's out there too. I don't know if you know him. He's a really cool guy. He's a great strength coach. He gave his advice to up and coming people that want to get into the industry is just train people for 10 years. Just focus on being really good at training people. It doesn't even have to be 10 years. It could just be, let's say, 5 years before you start writing articles and before you start putting out information and all that stuff. Because now, he goes, when you've trained that many people for that many years, you're going to have so much knowledge and you're going to have so many things to talk about that you're going to have the next 100 topics taken care of, as opposed to, okay, what do I write about or what do I talk about? I mean, you actually have to be out there experiencing things to have stuff to convey.
No, I mean, 100%. I remember when I was in my early 20s, when I was kind of finishing up my undergrad, and already had 5 years of training under my belt, and I was doing some strength and conditioning at the collegiate setting. A lot of people were telling me, hey, you need to start writing articles, and it's like, I was like, no, I don't have a firm enough grasp on things yet. I want to have a little bit more confidence in what I'm doing and understanding. And it wasn't really until I had a pretty good understanding, in my mind, I had to have a good kind of fundamental background in the foundations before I felt comfortable kind of giving advice on the internet or giving advice with articles. And I think, like you said, a lot of people, they train themselves for 6 months and think that they can start writing articles and books on how to train, and it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, it really doesn't. Well, hey, man, I don't want to hold you up. This has been about an hour. Great conversation. Is there anything you have coming up that you want to plug? Any product or service?
No, I mean, let's see. I got different podcasts and different articles that I'm always putting up on my website. I got my book, Movement Redefined, that kind of discusses all of my training methods that came out about a year and a half ago. It's been a big seller for me. So people who want to find out more about what I do, why I do it, the science behind it, my journey that I discussed briefly on here, it's all laid out in that book. There's different training programs, for different purposes, for different goals, for different levels of training. And they can find all that on my website at advancedhumanperformance.com. And then I got all my social media on there too, so they can check all that out.
I'll add that all to the show notes so people can find you easily. Well, hey, man, this is awesome. It's great talking to you. It's great meeting you as close to a person as we can get right now in a COVID world. And keep all the great work, man. I love looking at your posts every day. You put up great content. You add a lot of value. And yeah, I'm just glad that I'm able to access all the great information you put out there. So let me go ahead and stop recording here.